I'm Helen.
I'm Miss Sinclair.
And I'm Edison. Y'all better grab your extra large popcorn. We are in the thick of things with great films.
I am open and positive.
I don't like it.
Let's throw on these boxing gloves.
Let's do it.
Let's fucking do it.
Welcome to Talk Movie to Me, a weekly podcast where we do a deep dive on a new release that's just hit theaters or streaming. I'm Helen.
I'm Edison.
And I'm Miss Sinclair. Today we will be discussing The Zone of Interest, the most disturbing slice of life film I have personally ever seen. This is Jonathan Glazer's fifth feature film. The Zone of Interest tells the story of the Höss family. Rudolf Höss was commandant of the Auschwitz concentration camp in 1943. He and his wife and children lived an idyllic and alarmingly comfortable life right next to the camp itself. Höss takes pride in his work. His wife, Hedwig, takes pride in her garden, striving for a beautiful home that people envy, all while being numb and indifferent to the vile atrocities being committed right next door. But all isn't perfect in the Höss family. Rudolf has been promoted in his career and must relocate his family to a town near Berlin, much to the dismay of Hedwig, who is happy and comfortable in her house of horrors. Jonathan Glazer takes us deep into the banality of evil. He forces us to question how human beings can be so desensitized to atrocity, how we can bury our heads in the sand in order to advance, how the deafening sounds of horror can become muted background noise, just a humming we can tune out, how caring for the well-being of others comes second to our own agenda. The Zone of Interest asks the question, whatever happened to loving thy neighbor?
Jesus Christ. Yeah. That's the question.
Yeah.
First impressions, Edison.
Okay, so this film has a very unique opening. First off, it's just this like soaring dramatic overture playing over the title card. It's the title, The Zone of Interest, and the text is wobbly. It's like when you wake up in the middle of the night and you look at a digital clock. Not like any of us have those anymore, but you know what I mean. But it's just like blurry. And
Yeah.
of course, I'm already trying to think about this as like a choice and wonder, why. Blurred lines, blurry vision, not seeing clearly, whatever. But then the screen just goes black and the score plays for what is like maybe a full 3 or 4 minutes. I don't know. It was a long time, but it was sort of meditative and transportative, and it like successfully sort of placed me in this. Okay, I'm here in the movie theater. I'm watching this. I'm attentive. I'm intentional. And then boom, it opens to that idyllic scene of this family on a hill by this beautiful river. And you're like, oh, here we go. I thought it was a really memorable way to start this film. Totally distinct. Mm-hmm. What did you think, Helen?
Yeah, very disorienting. The text is disorienting. The sound is disorienting. And then we get that black screen with score, and it goes on for so long that I just shut my eyes.
I did too.
Yeah, and just listened because I'm like, okay, there's nothing for me to look at. Why don't I actually just listen to what I'm hearing here? Which I think is an interesting foreshadowing for how influential the sound of this film is. And then I had an interesting thought when we open on them by the water, just having this lovely afternoon. And I thought to myself, it's so interesting how in nature you couldn't film in like any sort of time period in the last however many years and it will pass for whatever time. Like if you have a shot of a forest, as long as it's just nature, it could be any time, you know? And my mind sort of went in that place of like, oh, how interesting, like that nature is timeless, really. Which doesn't really have anything to do with the movie, but that's just where my mind went. But yeah, that was my first few impressions. What about you, Sinclair?
Yeah, this was on my 2023 anticipated list. I love Jonathan Glazer so much. He's only made 5 features, which I think is kind of wild. He hasn't done a feature since Under the Skin, and that was 2013.
And was so good.
Yeah, so I've been waiting for him to put another film out. He did a short film called The Fall in 2019 that I've been trying to watch since 2019, and I finally got to see it because they put it on the Criterion channel. And that's definitely an experience as well, a 7-minute experience, but an experience nonetheless.
Was it 7 minutes in heaven?
No, it's straight into the void.
Okay.
Yeah, I love his films because they are so few and far between. And I was really excited for this despite its subject matter. You know, it's not something that you think that you'd be excited to watch. I went to see this at like 11 a.m. and I couldn't wait. This is not an early watch.
No,
it was
I don't
like
know what time of day is good to watch this movie, to be honest.
It was like me and some elderly film nerds watching this early in the morning. But I found that this opening was really similar to Under the Skin in the sense that it relies heavily on sound. And I find that he tends to lean more towards image and sound and less on dialogue to make an impact. So this had a lot of similarities to Under the Skin in that way at the beginning of the film, which, you know, is a film that I love. So I was definitely in. I was transfixed right away.
Why don't we jump right into storytelling here?
Yeah, so this is loosely based off of the 2014 novel by Martin Amis of the same name. I haven't read that book, but I read a brief description, and it is quite different from the movie. The family is based off of the Haas real life family. However, they have different names in the book, and the actual storyline is about a Nazi officer in Auschwitz who falls in love with the wife. And it's about them having this sort of like illicit love affair.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it's quite different from what we get in the movie. And apparently, Jonathan Glazer read that, I think, before it was even published, and optioned it immediately, and was very interested in making that story or a version of that story into a movie. And it has been, 10 years in the making.
So in this film, there's a lot of the use of the idea of the banality of evil, and it's represented in this slice of life, like almost documentary style fashion. I found this film. And the banality of evil comes from political theorist and philosopher Hannah Arendt, who basically explored, what does horror look like? What does evil look like? She studied war criminal Adolf Eichmann. He was a Nazi operative who was the organizer of the transportation of millions of Jewish people to concentration camps. And what she wrote about him was that he was neither perverted nor sadistic, but terrifyingly normal. And he acted without any motive other than to diligently advance his career in the Nazi bureaucracy. So he was essentially a paper pusher. He worked at a desk. He was a coordinator. And Haas is similar to that. And that's where the banality of evil tie-in comes in, because he is essentially the same as Eichmann in the way that he was looking at this as career advancement. You know, there's scenes in this film where it's people sitting behind a desk. There's people signing papers. They're having meetings like it's a normal 9 to 5. And you realize while you're watching this, oh, yeah, these were jobs. Like these were people that were caught up in this economic machine. And, you know, Haas, he's looking for ways to efficiently kill more people. You know, in real life, he was experimenting with different pesticides and gases. And there's that horrifying moment in the movie where he says, you know, I'm in that room with all those people and I'm thinking about how many people I can gas.
Like, how could I kill them? But the
how
ceilings
can I
are
do?
too,
Yeah,
too
how can I
high.
do this so efficiently? Now, you know, he was tried for his war crimes in real life, like same as Eichmann, but it's that same kind of person. You know, what does evil look like? Well, it can look like a normal, everyday man.
I think that when it comes to this level of atrocity and evil, we want to believe that you would have to be a monster in order to carry something like this out. And, you know, what the movie shows us is that that's just not the case.
Yeah.
That we all have the capacity for evil. And that is a very, very uncomfortable thing to have to confront.
Yeah, I thought that was, as far as the way that this story was told. There's a lot of films about the Holocaust. There are a lot of films about World War II and about the absolute atrocities committed at this time. So when you hear that there's a new film that is about that, you kind of have some expectation about what it might be. And what I thought was so, I don't know, original and affecting about this film is that it doesn't do that. It doesn't give us any of that. Yeah, you're right, Helen. We want a villain. You know, he is a villain. He's literally like an engineer for Auschwitz, like one of the most awful spots that has ever existed in the history of humanity. And this film doesn't give you, there's zero catharsis for us as the viewer in this story. We want to see the horror so that we can weep and yell and feel better about ourselves, because in doing that, we recognize the like humanity in our own tears. But the film refuses to give us that. It just makes us sit in this uncomfortable sort of flattened portrait of family life that's dull and mundane. And you get this increasing sort of steadily growing sickness in your stomach. It's like oppressive, but not by like hitting you in the head with it. It's so different. I've never seen this story told in this way before.
Yeah. Well, and also how evil can happen as well. And you see this family being normal, you know, quote unquote normal in their everyday life and just doing things that we do. And it's a reminder that the Nazi Party didn't seize power. They were elected in. You know? That's wild. You're seeing the people just living their everyday life.
Yeah, but
normally.
Like, don't you feel like we could be on the cusp of it again at any given moment? This is the part of it. It's just like, because to your point earlier about it being an organization.
Yeah.
You know?
It's the bureaucracy.
The bureaucracy.
Yeah.
You're just, humans have to do jobs. Most people aren't visionaries. Most people aren't whatever. Most people are job doers, are workers. So if your skill is that you can type and you're a secretary, then you're going to just get the job that does that. You got to put food on the table for your kids, and you're going to do this. And a lot of people ignore their complicity in the greater evil by saying, I just have a job to do.
Yeah. But I think that's like the economic machine as well at the same time, because, you know, you think of people where their jobs, just jobs in general, where your job becomes about numbers and the more meeting targets, and the more you become desensitized to your job affecting real human beings. And obviously this is one of the most just awful and terrible examples of that. But this happens to certain degrees where your job is your everyday thing and things just become mundane and normal, and you are seeing people as numbers.
It's interesting too with how mundane this film is at times. And when we see Hedwig, you know, bringing her mother through and showing her this beautiful home that she's created and bragging about the garden that she designed and all of these things, you know, there was a moment where I did step away from the premise and I could recognize the, like, you're proud to show your mother the home that you've made for yourself, right? Because that is a thing that means a lot to people. And I mean, I think about, I would love to have a home that I would be proud to show my mother that I own. Do you know what I mean? Like, I do understand that. In this context, it's something completely different. But this film does such a good job of just showcasing how we can compartmentalize our lives to fit and to suit what we think is best for us.
And like to what you were kind of saying earlier, Helen, about the humanity of these characters, really. When we think about Rudolf, it's kind of like Breaking Bad. Like when you watch that show, you watch the first episode and the final episode, and it's just not the same person, right? But all of his incremental decisions over the course of all of those seasons, somehow he could justify them to himself, right? And so you wonder about Rudolf, like, when did the humanity go? It's not like he woke up and was like, I'm going to make my job murdering all of the Jews. Like,
Right.
you know, they wanted to be farmers and live in the country and whatever. But at a certain point, this is what it was. And how does this human go from being a human existing in the world to attending a party and all he can think is that, as you say, like, how do I kill all these people in the party? It's really devastating, but you see it in like tiny decisions, and there's a warning here to heed.
There's a match for everyone too with Hedwig.
Right.
They were both just so vile. There is the one scene which I actually found to be the most, like, you know, there's so many scenes in this that are just so upsetting. But the most upsetting scene in this for me was when she has the fur coat and the lipstick.
Yeah.
These were belongings of somebody, and they're just being treated like objects that are just like up for grabs.
Yeah.
It's just such a disgusting moment. And Sandra Hüller, she's horrifying and wonderful in this movie, but just that casual.
So casual. She puts on that coat. She doesn't even give it a moment's thought.
Yeah.
And when the mom is there and she says, you know, oh, do you think so-and-so is on the other side of the, oh, she may be on the other side of the wall. Oh, who's she? You know, and talks, it's so, the way that they have dehumanized the Jewish people in this context is something that is really difficult. And I have to say, it is impossible to watch this film today and not place it in the context of Israel and Palestine and that entire conflict and situation. I'm not going to get into all of that on this podcast. It's not what this is. And there's plenty of other resources out there by people who are far more educated on the topic and to speak about it than I am. But there is something there about the dehumanization of a people and not seeing the humanity to such an extent that you can just grab a coat like that and not even give it a moment's thought, or a lipstick, right?
One of the moments in this movie that really struck me is when Rudolf goes to talk to his horse. And he's so heartbroken to say goodbye to his horse. He is treating his horse like a human being. And not the millions of people that he facilitated death for across the fence. Like, that was very chilling, that scene in particular for me.
Yeah, and I think for me, the most chilling scene in the whole thing was the one where he was just sitting in the room with all of the other men, and they were just laying out the plans for the new gas chambers. And it was going to be like rotating counterclockwise and just going through. It was so mechanical.
Yeah.
And entirely just completely devoid of any emotion whatsoever. Zero. None. Zip. Zilch.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, we could maybe 400 to 500, and the other corrects and says closer to 500. Efficiency.
But that is what those meetings would have been like.
It is. Yeah. It totally is.
There's no way that the Holocaust could have happened without like very efficient, organized business people.
And, you know, we don't see the stuff behind it. We see the horrors happening. And this movie decides to not show us that. So many movies have done that before. But to remind us that this happened somehow in terms of a job and paperwork. Like, it's wild to think about.
I know.
These things didn't build themselves, you know?
Of course.
Like, it's just...
To actively know that you are optimizing killing people.
You know, there's a quote in the movie, and it's kind of the philosophy that Rudolf and Hedwig are living by. You know, they say the life we enjoy is very much worth the sacrifice. And that is a mentality that a lot of people have, you know, maybe not to that certain degree, but this idea of sacrificing things, casualties of things to gain something.
But I think that what is interesting about this film too is that neither of them think of themselves as being evil.
No.
Even though from the outside we can look at what they're doing as being explicitly, definitively, unquestionably evil, right? But they don't see themselves as that. And I think that
they're just doing what they need to do for their family.
That's the garden. Like, I think that's the
Right.
garden symbolism. For me, I took the garden to symbolize the way that we use beautiful things as a mask to hide the like horrific sides of ourselves. And this is a family that's living right beside Auschwitz, and they're actively participating in the committing of these atrocities.
Well, and they're part of the garden is meant to literally mask Auschwitz, like grow
Correct. It
it,
is
grow
growing
the
up the
trees
wall.
high enough so that we can't see it.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it is also literally fertilized with the ashes of the Jews. Like, it is exactly explicitly that. But this garden is this decorative thing of beauty that somehow allows them to not confront the reality of their own loss of humanity, their
yeah.
own self. What they have sacrificed in this context is their soul, their humanity. And that's pretty horrifying. But I think that, yes, obviously we don't all experience it to that extent, but I think that there is something universal there in a lot of ways. Like, for everybody, we, rather than atone for the things, our sins, or take responsibility for some of our actions that we may not be proud of, we surround ourselves with beautiful things or items
Turn
that
a
we wear as
blind eye.
badges. Yeah, totally. All these things so we don't have to look at ourselves in that light.
Another interesting storytelling element that when I was watching it, I found a bit discombobulating and I couldn't quite understand it. But there's a few scenes where we have night vision, essentially, and we see what appears to be a young girl hiding food at Auschwitz. And it turns out that that was actually based off of a real Polish girl named Alexandria who did that. She would sneak into Auschwitz and hide apples and hide food for the prisoners. And she really did find that piece of music that we see.
Oh, wow.
That was real. And apparently, too, the bike that the actor is riding was her actual bike, the actual woman.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and I read an interview with Jonathan Glazer that I gave with The Guardian, and they asked him why that was included in this film, basically. And his answer was, quote, "It represented that small act of resistance. The simple, almost holy act of leaving food is crucial because it is the one point of light. I really thought I couldn't make the film at that point. I kept ringing my producer and saying, I'm getting out. I can't do this. It's just too dark. It felt impossible to show the utter darkness. So I was looking for the light somewhere and I found it in her. She's the force for good."
Which is interesting because she's only shown in darkness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's so much opposition in this. You know, the horror is shown in the day. We normally associate horror with nighttime. And the goodness and the light is actually showed at night with the night vision. And, you know, we also see the juxtaposition of the flowers. You know, it will zoom in on a flower and then you hear the screams from behind the wall. And I wanted to ask you two, because I don't know if this film will be for everybody, especially like the style of this film, but do the artistic elements and the abstract elements like strike you as something that will be effective in terms of telling this story? Now, for me, it is effective. Some people respond more to something like a Spielberg film that has more emotionality, has maybe more character development to a certain degree, maybe is more sentimental. That works for some people. And I've heard criticisms of this being unapologetically artsy.
I didn't find that.
But does this work? Does like going to a red screen, does that work effectively for everyone to tell a story in that way? Does it even matter if it does?
I think that the way that this film is shot, which we can talk more about in technical, I think that it is very effective in forcing you to see this scenario from a different perspective. Because we have seen the horrors of the Holocaust in film a lot of different ways and a lot of times. The horrors have been put in our faces. The way that this movie just limits it to the sound, but that we're forced to witness these people live their lives right beside it, is horrific in a different way, and I found to be very, very effective. Like, it really did make me think about the Holocaust and the capacity for evil in human beings in a way that I've never thought about it before. So it was definitely effective for me.
Yeah, I agree 100%. For me too. I think this film isn't going to be for everybody, obviously. You know, this isn't Avengers Endgame. It's not going to make $2.8 billion at the box office all around the world. It's not what it is. It was never going to be that film. So then, is this film effective for the people who are going to watch it? I think that the utter lack of sentimentality in this film is effective for the story that this film is trying to tell completely, because it is a different experience than what we've had before. You know, we've all seen Schindler's List. It's an incredible film. That's Spielberg's take on this.
Right.
It moves you, you're weeping. It's a totally different thing altogether than what this is, but I think this is effective. Yeah.
And I think that we do become desensitized sometimes.
Yeah,
And
to
this-
what we've seen a lot of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this movie is not that. We are not desensitized to this.
So one more thing I want to touch on before we move on from storytelling is the ending. It's a very interesting ending. You know, we see Haas standing in, you know, what will become a museum, and he is about to vomit, and he chokes back his vomit, and then we move forward into time, and we see, you know, the aftermath of all of this and everything he's contributed to. How did we interpret that ending? I'm curious.
I don't know. It was very jarring. I was not expecting it, and I wasn't expecting it to show us that and then to come back to him. So, to be honest, I'm not sure.
I think for me, it was kind of like the mundanity of life just keeps going. Like, it was two parts. That was one thing, whereas there's nothing more mundane than like Windexing
Right.
a glass display wall
and
in
like
a
once
museum.
again, just people doing their job.
Just people doing
every
their job,
day
whatever.
in this setting. Yeah.
But it also did make me actually extremely uncomfortable about looking at the museum. Where in a weird way, after this whole film and after his pride and everything and all the rest, I was just like, this feels like a trophy case in a way that I that I would not have ever thought of. And I've not been to Auschwitz, but I have been to the synagogue, the Dohany Street Synagogue in Budapest, and it has a museum and from the Holocaust. This was a really large camp there as well, and I found it to be like one of the most horrifying things I've ever kind of gone through, like affecting things I've ever seen. But then seeing it in this film, it made me feel like, like this resistance to the museum, because it felt like polishing it, keeping it tidy. I was like, this is not your point of pride. I don't know. It was very weird. It was a weird feeling.
Yeah. But, you know, these things do exist as well to be a reminder of past
of course.
mistakes and to say, hey, this happened. It's interesting that he goes to throw up and he swallows it back down. It's, you know, once again, a way of repressing any sort of guilt or responsibility, any sort of acceptance of the evil that he's done. And where this person stands in time, the impact this person has, you know, what is your legacy in history? What are the long-term effects of your actions? I personally, I don't know if I could be in that space. You know, I've
That's
never
how I
been to
felt.
one of these museums, and I just, I feel the history in spaces,
Yeah.
and I just don't know if I want to be in them.
I
So
agree.
it just kind of gave me that feeling.
Yeah.
So I think, Helen, you saying I don't have any words, well, I think that this movie didn't even use a ton of words. It used a feeling.
True. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, 100%. Okay, well, why don't we talk about performances? So the kind of bigger name here is Sandra Hüller, who's nominated for an Oscar for Anatomy of a Fall. I thought she was really great in this. I will say this film, oddly is not about the performances for me at all. In a
That's
weird
also
way.
my point. Yep. So go on.
It's like, it's really not. It's so
Yeah.
weird. Like, I'm watching them, but they're just, again, it's because they're not given, there's no like emotional arc. This is a very different take. This is, it's so unremarkable. There's no sentimentality. It's like, they're just people, and mostly people are like unremarkable. And so the performances are sort of unremarkable too, except that they're natural and believable.
Yeah, there's a lot of public solitude in this movie, so actors just going about their business as if they're not being watched, and the way that this was filmed facilitated that. But she is very good in this in a very different way from Anatomy of a Fall. But as I was watching this, I did think to myself, I wonder if the Academy is partly nominating her for this film as well by giving her that acting nomination, because this is a different but equally moving performance.
Yeah, and there isn't supposed to be glory in this. You know, like this movie isn't meant to be like a star-making movie. That's not what this is, and I think that that's why the acting is really good in this, because they had to dial it down and be as truthful to showing a slice of life and not glorifying something. That they are part of a bigger vision, and they need to fit within that vision, because this movie works as a feeling and not as a standout, like a standout performance.
Right.
Well, to the point that, like, Christian Friedel, who plays Rudolf, when I tell you that I would not know if I walked into a coffee shop tomorrow and bumped into him, I really mean that. And I guess that is a good performance in the context of this film, because he's meant to be so ordinary as to be kind of forgettable, but he like what is entirely forgettable to me.
He does,
I don't know what to say about
look
that.
a lot like Rudolf Haas.
Yeah.
If you look up photos.
But that's
It's
a
just kind of freaky.
testament to kind of showing how evil can look normal. How evil's like,
Right.
can be your, everyday
And that's not
person.
shade to the performance.
No,
that's
no.
That's not me saying
If
like,
anything,
oh,
I think that's a testament to the performance, because a lesser actor would try and be more showy or would try and
Yes.
prove themselves, I think.
yeah, I believed without a single shadow of a doubt that he was this person throughout the entire film.
Yeah. And Sandra Hüller has always said she would never play a Nazi. And she was given a scene from this movie. I would assume maybe the scene where he tells her that they have to relocate. And she didn't know the context, but was given that fight scene and thought it was really good. And then found out afterwards, like, this is the context of the movie, and then agreed to do it. That in particular, like when they go down to the water and she's like, okay, well, I'll stay and you go. You could take that scene out of the context of this movie and it would be a good scene between a husband and wife.
Totally.
And
Totally.
everyday marital problems.
Yeah.
The husband having to
exactly.
take a job somewhere.
Yeah.
And maybe the wife wants to stay. These are everyday marital strifes.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk about technical? We've sort of danced around a few of the elements of it in talking about storytelling. I think that there's a couple of things that are really key to this film working. And I'm sure we're all on the same page with that. So let's jump into that.
Yeah, so Jonathan Glazer and the cinematographer Lucas Zoll actually set up 10 cameras around the house and just let them run.
Yeah,
And
that's so cool.
so it really is like you're a fly on the wall of this house and this family existing in this home. And I can't imagine how much footage they would have had to comb through to edit this movie together. But the house itself as well was constructed to be a replica of the actual house, which is quite chilling to think
Oh,
about.
God. That would be so... Oh, God.
Yeah.
I can't even. Like, ugh.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think that two technical stars of this movie, because this movie is described as two movies. There's the movie you see, the movie you hear. And you're seeing images where the sound doesn't match and shouldn't match.
Right.
These things should never be together.
Yeah.
And it's just so interesting technically.
Yeah.
Nothing was sensationalized. Everything kind of looked like an impressionist painting to me. You know the impressionist paintings you see where it's like a family on the beach.
Yeah,
They're just doing these slice of life things. Things look serene. I just felt this movie was just it was just a painting. You know?
I thought that the setting was really idyllic and beautiful. Honestly, the truth is, in that very opening scene when they're on that gorgeous green lush hill and there's people swimming down the hill in the river, all I could think was I mean, context, I'm in Nova Scotia. We're currently buried under literally 100+ centimeters of snow. And I was just I just want to swim in that river. Also, how nice to swim in this river and not have to worry about a shark. And it was just so beautiful that I was fully swept away. And that's how this film opens, by luring me into this before that. But yeah, visually, I thought a lot of it's interesting because the scenes around the house and stuff were also pretty unremarkable. Really interesting shots and angles and those types of things, but it wasn't like this was Downton Abbey. It didn't look glamorous, or it didn't glorify the era in any capacity.
Well, even thinking about that series of shots when he goes around locking all the doors at night, right?
Yes.
You can tell that's just taken from a series of cameras around the house. It's almost like you're going between CCTV footage or something, watching him do that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the sound design.
If this doesn't win the Oscar for it,
It has to win sound. So the sound designer was Johnny Byrne, and apparently he compiled a 600-page document of sounds that would have existed in Auschwitz, and also the distance from where the house would have been to where certain things would have been happening, and constructed and designed sound that would have been accurate for where they were, between human screaming, gunshots.
God, that's so harrowing.
It's harrowing, but it's also an incredible artistic feat.
But imagine the research that he had to go through in order to do the labor to go into crafting the sound design for this. It did a lot of the heavy lifting for this film, to be honest. And it was truly remarkable in so many ways. The first way is that it's all you can hear for the first chunk of the movie. And then you stop noticing it. And
you get used to it.
That's what's wild.
I know.
That's what's
yes,
wild.
That's very disturbing.
And then he goes to the party, and he's in the party scene near the end, and it's the same white noise of sound in the background, even though it's an entirely different sound, but you're only half clocking it. Man, this film.
I know.
And the score.
Yeah.
By Mika Levy. I mean, the score isn't that present throughout the film itself, except in these dramatic moments where you have that big red screen like you talked about, or at the beginning, and then the end, over the credits, I was okay, I am already ending this film feeling a bit and then that was completely insane, the score over the credits.
I ran out of the theater, to be honest. I couldn't wait to get out of the theater at the end of this movie. It was too much for me.
I love the collaboration between Mika Levy and Jonathan Glazer. Under the Skin, that's one of my favorite scores ever. And there's something just really just haunting and jarring about it. Obviously in Under the Skin, it's a little bit more prominent, but within Zone of Interest, it fits very seamlessly. It's very well done.
Yeah. All right. Well, what is the last word on the Zone of Interest, Miss Sinclair?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite movies of the year. I think The Zone of Interest and Poor Things are my favorite movies of 2023. We've already talked about this film so much in this episode. I'll just keep it really short. I think that this is one of the most thought-provoking films that I've seen in a while. And I think he's an incredible artist. I think he's just such a visionary. And I almost want to say I wish he would make more films, but what he's doing and the timeline that he's doing it seems to be working, because it tends to be quality over quantity. And I really, really appreciate him as a filmmaker. Edison?
For me, yeah, I agree with you. This film, It's such a weird one because it's hard to say it was like one of my favorite films of the year.
I know,
It certainly
I know.
wasn't one of my favorite like film watching experiences. But it is, I think, one of the best films of the year without question because it is so effective. It's so original. I've just never seen this story told in quite this way before. And because it doesn't give you a moment's relief, you're really forced to sit with your own self in this.
Yeah.
And this isn't just specific to this time.
No.
It's for any time. It's for right now as well. Every time we open up our Instagram or watch the news, it's an endless stream of horrors from around the world. But you know, we can close that. I can close that app and order some Thai takeout and sit here in my comfortable, cozy house and be safe on this side of the wall. And so it just, I've been thinking about this film nonstop since I've seen it. I don't know that I'll ever watch it again. Yeah, it was really incredible. Yeah. What did you think, Helen?
This movie disgusted me, as it should. And it made me reflect on my own complicity in the horrors of the world. So just a really lovely Monday afternoon viewing for me. But no, this movie is incredible, and it better win sound at the Oscars.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been another episode of Talk Movie to Me. If you would like to get in touch with us, our email is talkmovietome@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram @talkmovietome. Rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And season 7 episodes are on YouTube @Talk Movie to Me podcast. I'm Helen.
I'm Miss Sinclair.
I'm Edison.